A deed can feel like a blessing, until you realize it reads more like an invitation. When my family first walked into that ranch house, the air stung with the bitter smell of dried herbs and smoke soaked into old wood. I told myself it was simple. A place shut for years, dust and heat trapped inside boards. That excuse was easy to hold on to, and it was wrong. I was 11, stuck between older brothers and little kids, old enough to understand money, and young enough to think adults could outrun consequences. My father Ricardo worked hard jobs in the city, and still we lived squeezed into a cheap apartment over a mechanic shop. My mother Elena made hope out of small things. My brothers were Phoeben, 17, loud and restless, and Tom's, 15, always hunting for trouble. My little brother Nico was 7, still clutching childhood like a blanket, and we had a 2-month-old baby, Gabriel. Ricardo never spoke about his own father. If we asked, his face shut down and he would change the subject. So when he came home holding a thin envelope and said Don Aurelio was dead, the room went quiet. He explained a notary had called. The old man had left him a ranch, land with animals and crops, everything in Ricardo's name. Elena's eyes lit up at once. For her, it sounded like escape. For Ricardo, it sounded like a hook. He never gave me anything, he muttered, staring at the paper. Why now? That night my parents whispered after they thought we were asleep. Elena spoke in a steady voice, the voice she used when she tried to make fear behave. Ricardo answered in a lower tone, not angry, just cautious. He said his father believed in shortcuts. Then he added something that made my stomach tighten even though I did not fully grasp it. If he left it to us, Ricardo said, it is because he wants something finished. We left 3 days later because hope does not like to wait. The city thinned into dry fields. The road turned to dirt. Wind rattled the windows. Dust coated our bags. My mother kept saying we would be fine as if repeating it could seal the deal. The ranch gate was rusted metal tied shut with wire. Ricardo cut it and pushed. The hinge screamed, high and sharp. Past the gate the land stretched wide enough to swallow sound. The house sat back from the road, wood-weathered gray, porch sagging, windows dark. Inside, the herb smell hit harder, bitter leaves, smoke, and something medicinal that caught in the back of my throat. Sunlight entered in narrow slants and made the dust sparkle like ash. Elena threw open windows and laughed too brightly. It just needs air, she said. Ricardo moved through each room like he was checking for traps, pausing in doorways, scanning corners. In a back bedroom, I found an old photo album in a drawer. The pages were swollen from humidity. Don Aurelio stared out of most pictures with a hard mouth. In several photos, someone had scratched out the eyes of other people. Deep grooves that tore the paper. I found one picture of Ricardo as a boy standing beside the old man, hands clasped tight, expression already guarded. I carried it to my father, thinking it might soften him. Ricardo took the album like it weighed too much. He barely looked before his voice sharpened. Put it back. Don't go through his things. Not here. That was the first time I felt the ranch as a rule instead of a place. Night came heavy. In the city, darkness still had streetlights and distant engines. Out there, the blackness pressed against the windows. The herb smell thickened, like the house breathed it out after sunset. I lay in bed listening to wood creak as it cooled. Then I heard movement in the hallway. 4 clear beats on the boards, steady, like hooves rather than feet. The sound passed my door, paused, and my heart kicked hard. From the closet came a slow scrape, like nails dragging across wood from inside. I told myself it was rats, a loose latch, the house settling. A rational story is a blanket you pull over your head. The sounds drifted away and stopped. I did not sleep. I waited for the first gray light. Morning made everything look harmless again. Ricardo assigned chores. I carried feed to sheep, pigs, and cows, keeping my mind busy. The last pen sat farther back under mesquite trees. One goat lived there alone. Ricardo had warned me it stayed separate and it could bite. The goat watched me approach with eyes that felt too calm, too focused. When I poured water, its gaze followed the stream. When I dropped feed, it did not rush forward. It stood still, staring at me as if it recognized me. I backed away, uneasy. The goat's mouth moved, and the corners pulled upward into something that looked like a smile. I blinked hard, angry at myself for being scared of an animal. Then a voice came from inside the pen, low and close, saying my name with perfect clarity. Diego. My skin tightened as if cold water had been poured down my spine. I turned and ran toward the house. Behind me, on the packed dirt path, I heard the soft, measured clop of hooves following, patient enough to let me think I might escape. For a few days, we pretended the goat was just a goat, and the house was just old. Ricardo worked from sunrise to dark repairing fences and patching holes as if nails could seal whatever had followed him home. Elena scrubbed the kitchen until it smelled like soap, then lit a small candle to the Virgin in the corner and acted like faith was another kind of lock. IVN and Tom's complained. Nico stayed close to me, and Gabriel cried whenever the wind hit the porch just right. The strange did not vanish. It learned where we looked away. A week after we arrived, Elena was washing dishes while the rest of us were outside doing chores. She told me later she noticed movement on the porch through the edge of her vision. A tall figure walking straight toward the front door. At first, she assumed it was Ricardo, but the figure wore a hat and a loose denim shirt, the kind of clothes Ricardo never wore. She turned fully and saw the person climb the steps without hesitation. Then she heard the front door open and slam hard enough to rattle the kitchen window. Elena grabbed a knife and rushed into the hallway, expecting a thief. The house was empty. She checked the bedrooms, the pantry, the dark corners under the table. Nothing moved. No footsteps retreated. The door was still latched from the inside. When she told Ricardo that night, he stared at the floor for a long time and then said, "Maybe the wood shifted in the heat." It was an explanation you could dismiss easily, and that was exactly why it hurt. A lie can be comforting when the truth is bigger than you are. Fian's story came next, and he told it only because it made him look less reckless than it made him look scared. He had slipped out to a party down the road. Sure, Ricardo would not notice. He came back after midnight, moving quietly behind the corrals, so he could reach his window without crossing the porch. Moonlight washed the fences in pale stripes. He said the air smelled sharp in pockets, like something sour rising from the dirt. Halfway across the yard he heard a soft sound, like someone trying to get his attention. He spun around expecting Ricardo, but he saw only the cows in their corral, standing in a line at the far end. He kept walking. Then he heard it again, this time shaped into his name, spoken in my voice. Ivan. He froze. I was asleep in the house. He knew that. Still, he stepped closer to the fence, angry at the idea of being mocked. "Stop it," he whispered. "You are going to get us caught." The cows did not move. They looked wrong in the moonlight, too still, like statues someone had placed there. Ivan counted them and realized one cow was missing. He tried to convince himself it had wandered into shadow. Then he heard my voice again, closer, coaxing. "Ivan, come here." He turned to leave and stopped mid-step. The missing cow stood behind him, outside the corral, close enough that he could see moisture on its muzzle. Ivan swore he had not heard the gate. The cow's head lifted higher than it should have, and then, awkwardly, it shifted its weight back. Its front legs tensed, and its body rose. Not onto a mound, not to scratch, but upward, like it was trying to stand the way a person stands. Ivan ran. He forced himself not to scream because screaming would make it real. He climbed through his window and hid under his blanket, breathing through his mouth to keep from retching. Outside the glass he heard my voice pleading, soft and urgent. "Open up. I am scared. Let me in." Between those words he heard hooves circling on the dirt, slow enough to sound confident. He did not open the window. At dawn the voice stopped. When he looked outside, there were no tracks he could trust. Only dust disturbed by wind. Ricardo said it was a prank, and his tone was too harsh for a man who truly believed it. He shouted at Tom's and me, and even at Ivan, telling us to stop filling the house with nonsense. Elena watched him and said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only way to keep a family from cracking. Nico's encounter left marks that no one could shout away. Ricardo sent him to the old tool shed to fetch nails and a hammer. The shed sat apart from the house, its door warped, its windows filmed with grime. Nico hated that building because the air around it carried a stench that made his eyes water, like rotten eggs in wet soil. He went anyway, because Ricardo's orders were never optional. Inside, Nico found the hammer quickly. As he turned to leave, he heard a woman say his name, clear as a voice in a small room. "Nico." He spun around. In the dimness, a woman sat in a chair that should not have fit in that crowded shed. She held a candle between both hands. The wick burned, but the flame did not throw light. It was fire that refused to behave. Nico had a cheap flashlight in his pocket, a toy he treated like a weapon. He clicked it on and pointed at her face. He told me her eyes were white, not pale, white like milk. She smiled too wide, stretching her mouth into something that looked practiced. She spoke again, sweetly, as if inviting him. "Come closer." Nico screamed and ran for the door, but the door would not open. He shoved and kicked, crying so hard he could not breathe. Behind him, the woman did not rush. She only repeated his name like a lullaby that wanted him asleep. When Ricardo finally heard the noise and yanked the door from the outside, Nico fell into his arms shaking. Ricardo stormed into the shed with a flashlight and found nothing but tools and dust. No chair, no candle, no woman. Nico held up his forearm anyway. 4 red scratches ran across his skin, fresh and raised. Ricardo stared at them, then at the shed, then back at Nico. "You caught yourself on something," he said. His voice wavered on the last word. That night Elena cleaned Nico's arm, and Ricardo brought his shotgun inside for the first time. He leaned it against the bedroom wall, pretending it was normal. Pretending we lived in a world where you could shoot the thing that was wrong. 2 nights later, Ricardo came home drunk from visiting men he had known as a boy. He was angry at himself for feeling afraid, and anger is what he used to stand upright. I heard him stumbling in the yard and then heard him shout, a sharp warning meant for an intruder. "Get out." Silence followed. Then the porch boards creaked as he walked closer to whatever he had seen. A moment later, there was a heavy thud. The sound of a man hitting ground. At dawn, Ricardo sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot. Elena asked what happened. Ricardo tried to laugh it off, but the laugh fell apart. "I saw someone by the hay bales," he admitted. "Tall, standing with his back to me. I thought it was a thief." He paused, and I saw his throat work like he was swallowing something sharp. "When I grabbed his shoulder," he said. He turned around. It was a man with a donkey's face. Elena crossed herself so fast her fingers blurred. Ivan stared at Ricardo like he was hearing a confession. Tom's bravado cracked for the first time, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Ricardo stood suddenly and went outside. He circled the goat pen, adding a new length of rope to the latch, tightening it until his knuckles whitened. He did not look at the animal, but the goat watched him the whole time, silent and steady. When Ricardo came back inside, he spoke in a voice that was too calm to trust. "From now on," he said, "no one goes out after dark. If you hear knocking, ignore it. If you hear a voice that sounds like one of us, ignore it. If you hear your own voice, stay still." He looked at me, and his eyes carried something colder than fear. "If something knows your name," he added, "it has already been watching." That night, long after the house went quiet, I heard the goat outside give a soft, breathy sound that was not a bleat. It sounded too much like a chuckle. Ricardo's rules did not make the ranch safer. They only made it quieter, and quiet has a way of turning suspicion into certainty. We moved through the days like people trying not to wake something sleeping under the floorboards. Elena watched windows. Avon stopped laughing at Nico. Tom stopped asking to go out. Even Gabriel's cries seemed to shrink, as if the baby sensed he was being listened to. The first time I heard the pigs, it was mid-afternoon while I cleaned a trough behind their pen. I heard 2 voices murmuring nearby, low and quick, like Ivan and Tom's arguing under their breath. I assumed they were hiding again, maybe smoking, maybe plotting something. I followed the sound around the fence corner, ready to scold them. There were only 2 pigs in the shade. They lay on their sides, heavy and calm. But when they noticed me, they lifted their heads at the same time, their eyes fixed on me with a glossy patience that felt wrong. The murmuring stopped, and the silence felt staged, like someone had paused a recording. I waited for my brothers to step out laughing. No one appeared. The pig's ears twitched, and the murmuring started again, shaped like speech but too fast to catch. My stomach dropped. The sound was coming from them. I backed away, trying to move casually. A thin voice slipped through the murmur and formed a broken version of my name. Not loud, not threatening, just familiar enough to make me feel owned. I ran to the house and told Elena it was the heat making me dizzy. I did not say the truth. Some truths grow stronger the moment you give them air. That evening, Tom's finally admitted what had happened to him. He waited until Ricardo was outside and Elena was bathing Gabriel. Then he leaned close to me and Ivan, his face stripped of bravado. "I saw something in the yard," he whispered. "It followed me." He said he had cut across the corrals on his way back from meeting a friend, the same reckless path the Forfan had taken. He heard footsteps behind him, a hard tapping like hooves, but spaced like a person walking. When he turned, he saw a woman in the shadow near the fence. At first, she looked human, but her feet were split and dark like a goat's. Her arms hung too low. Her fingers dragged lines in the dust. Her eyes were wide as if she did not know how to blink. Then she smiled. She ran on those hooved feet with speed that made the yard feel smaller. Tom sprinted, breath slicing his throat, and felt a cold hand clamp around his ankle. He hit the ground hard. She dragged him and laughed softly, pleased, as if she had earned the right. Tom's kicked and twisted until he drove his heel into her face. Her grip released, and he crawled up, shaking, and ran again. He reached Chato, our dog tied near the end of the corrals. Tom's untied him and yelled at him to run toward the thing behind him. Chato lunged barking into the dark. Tom's did not look back. He locked himself in his room until dawn. We never saw Chato again. The next morning, Tom showed us the bruise around his ankle. It looked like fingers had pressed into him. There was also a thin cut, perfectly straight, like a nail dragged across skin. Ricardo saw it and did not call it a prank. He simply tightened the locks and loaded the shotgun. After that, Nico refused to leave my side. To distract him, I pulled out an old metal detector from a box, a broken toy we used like a game. We swept the ground behind the tool shed, pretending we were treasure hunters. The detector squealed faintly once, then again, and Nico dropped to his knees and began digging with his hands. His fingers hit cloth. We uncovered a small fabric sack tied tight with 3 threads. One red, one black, one brown. The knots were pulled so hard they bit into the fabric. I cut the threads with my pocket knife, and a metallic sour smell rose at once, like old blood warmed by sun. Inside were stones, a small jar streaked with dried red, and a wad of photographs bent and stuck together. I pulled one free and felt the world tilt. It was a picture of Ivan near the corrals, taken from a distance. Not posed, not expected. Another showed Elena holding Gabriel on the porch. Another showed Ricardo at the fence. More photos of us, caught mid-step, mid-breath. Moments we never knew belonged to someone else. Some had thread tied around the corners like restraints. A family photo can be love. In the wrong hands, it becomes a target. Nico started to cry. I shoved everything back into the sack and ran it to the house. Elena crossed herself when she saw the threads. Ricardo's face changed as if he recognized a language he hated. He took the sack and walked straight outside to the spot where we found it. He dug without speaking, shovel biting dry soil, and within minutes he unearthed more sacks. 3, maybe 4, all buried at different depths, like someone had arranged them over time. Ricardo carried them inside and set them on the kitchen table like evidence. He did not let us touch them again. Late that night, I woke to my parents' voices. They were whispering, but anger made Ricardo's words sharp. I heard rumors in town, he said. About my father and favors. Elena asked what kind. Ricardo hesitated, as if the answer was poison. He bought things with promises, he said, and when it came time to pay, he looked for someone else to offer. Elena cried into her hands. Ricardo told her to pack a bag quietly. He said we might need to leave fast. He did not say where we would go, only that we should never have come. The ranch did not wait for daylight. It happened close to 3 in the morning, when the night feels thick enough to touch. Elena screamed from the bedroom, a raw sound that jolted me upright. Gabriel cried, high and urgent, then went silent mid-wail as if someone pinched the sound off. My door stood open, even though I had closed it. The hallway smelled of herbs and smoke so strongly it tasted like ash. I ran out and hit the light switch. The bulb buzzed and the hallway filled with weak yellow light. I looked up and my mind refused the image before it accepted it. A woman clung to the ceiling above the hall like a spider. Her hair hung down in ropes. Her eyes were fully white. Her mouth stretched into a grin that seemed too wide to belong to bone. Her fingers pressed into the plaster as if it were soil. My body moved before my thoughts caught up. I ran to Nico's room. His door would not open. Nico was inside, pounding and sobbing, shouting my name. I slammed my shoulder into the door until the latch snapped and it burst inward. Nico stumbled into me shaking. Fresh scratches scored his forearm, deeper than before, blood slick in the light. He pointed into the room and babbled about long arms and laughter. I did not look back. I grabbed him and ran. In the living room, Afivan and Tom stood barefoot, wide-eyed, holding a chair leg and a kitchen knife like they mattered. Ricardo was at the front door with the shotgun raised, breathing hard. Elena was on the porch, screaming Gabriel's name, then screaming something worse. "Where is he?" Ricardo sprinted outside. A shot cracked the night, then another. The flash lit the yard for an instant, and I saw movement near the pens, too thin to be an animal, and too fast to be human. It slipped behind the tool shed and vanished. Toms ran to the baby's crib inside and froze. Evan grabbed Elena and held her back because she was already running barefoot toward the darkness. Nico clung to my shirt so tightly the fabric stretched. The crib was empty. No blanket, no baby, no blood. Only a space where a body had been. Clean and impossible. Ricardo searched until dawn, circling the property with flashlights, shouting threats into the brush. The ranch answered with silence and distant hoofbeats that did not match any animal we owned. When the sky finally began to pale, Ricardo came back to the porch with dust on his knees and despair in his eyes. Elena's face looked older by years. We left without packing properly, without locking the door, without taking anything that mattered. Ricardo drove fast down the dirt road, the truck bouncing, Elena rocking in the passenger seat, making a sound that was half prayer, half broken breath. I looked back through the rear window. The house shrank into the morning haze. For a moment, I thought I saw a tall figure on the porch watching us go, hat brim dark, against the sky. Then, from somewhere behind the house, a sound rose, thin and far, like a baby crying. Elena jerked toward it, eyes wild, ready to leap from the moving truck, but the cry warped as it carried across the land, thinning into a soft exhale that sounded too much like laughter trying not to be heard. Ricardo drove until the ranch was far behind us and the sun was fully up. As if daylight could undo what night had taken, we stopped at a neighboring property where an old acquaintance let us in without questions. He gave us water, and a room where Nico and I could sit on the floor and shake without being told to stop. Elena stared at her empty arms. Ivan punched a fence post until his knuckles split. Toms kept whispering Chato's name like he was trying to call the dog back from the dark. Someone told Ricardo about a curandera in town. He hesitated only long enough to look at Elena. Then he nodded. Dua Luz lived on the outskirts in a small house that smelled of copal and bitter plants. Puerile branches hung by the door. Candles lined a shelf beside saints and worn photographs. The air felt heavy, like a place that had heard too many confessions. She listened, then studied the sack with the colored threads. Her face tightened. "These are trabuchos," she said. "Work done on you. Work buried in your land so you carry it every time you walk." Ricardo demanded to know who would do it. Dua Luz met his eyes. "Simone, who promised," she answered. She passed an egg over Nico's scratched arm, then over my head, murmuring prayers. She brushed our shoulders with puerile until my skin prickled. She made us drink something black and bitter. She sprinkled salt at the doorway and drew a small cross of oil on our foreheads. A candle burned beside her, bright, but the shadows in the corners did not retreat as much as they should. Before we left, Dua Luz cracked the egg into a glass of water. A thin dark strand curled inside it like smoke trapped under liquid. She set the glass on the table and said, almost to herself, "A candle that gives no light is not for seeing, it is for calling." Then she pressed a small pouch of herbs into Ricardo's palm. "Hang it above your door," she said. "It will not bring him back, but it will remind the dark you are not unguarded." When she finished, she faced Ricardo. "Your father," she said softly. "Don Aurelio wanted land and money without waiting. He asked for help from things that do not help for free. When they came for their price, he offered what he believed he owned." Elena made a sound like she had been punched. Ricardo went rigid, as if a chain had snapped tight inside him. "Dua Luz said the ranch was not a gift. It was a delivery." She asked if all of us had been baptized. Elena nodded fast, then froze. Gabriel had been only 2 months old. She had wanted to wait for family, to make it a celebration. There had never been time. Dua Luz did not look surprised. "Some doors open easier," she said. "Do not return, and never answer a voice that calls you on that land." We never went back. Ricardo sold what he could through intermediaries and refused to speak. Don Aurelio's name again. Elena's grief sat beside her in every room. Tom's kept his scar and his guilt about Chateau. Nico slept with lights on for years. I carried the memory like a stone in my chest. I kept one photograph from the buried sack, taken without our knowledge. The ranch house sits behind us, windows black. When I look closely, the reflection in the glass does not match the sky. Sometimes, years later, I wake in my city apartment and smell that same bitter herb smoke, sharp as a warning. The room will be still. No wind, no open window. Then I hear a soft tapping that reminds me of hooves on wood, and a voice, close enough to feel against my ear, will say my name. Diego, come.